So if you've consumed any amount of hunting or habitat improvement content, you will have heard the term access. And I feel like that really gets thrown around a lot. It is pretty vague. And so today I wanted to go over, what does good access actually look like? What does that mean? And how can you use that to implement it on your farm, or potentially, look at changing the way your farm lays out because of that. So we are down here on my main hunting farm, and this is a property that has incredible access at multiple levels. And so, I feel like this is a great framework to kind of show you guys, what does it truly mean to have good access. Like I said in the intro there, I feel like it really gets thrown around a lot. There's really not a lot of clarity, and you really don't see on a lot of these hunting shows, what does good access actually look like. I consult on properties all across, the Midwest, primarily here in Ohio. And I see, a lot of stand setups that frankly, I would never even consider putting a stand at these locations, just because the access is horrible and you can't actually get to them to hunt. So I want to go through a few things that kind of are key indicators if you have good access or bad access. Right off the bat, first things first is your predominant wind direction. So that is, when I'm looking at buying a farm, leasing a farm, getting permission on a farm, these are the first things I'm looking at, is what is the, general wind direction going to be. Here in Ohio, generally it's going to be somewhat out of the west. Either you're going to have a southwest or northwest on a cold front, but generally speaking, it's coming out of the west. And that's true for most, areas in the Midwest. And so, if you're accessing from the northwest corner, for example, so you're waiting for a cold front to come through because that's when the deer are moving. Now the wind is out of the northwest, and that's where you have to come into the property. Well, now that makes it super difficult to get to any of your stands. You're blowing your wind to your stand location, and all the deer down that direction are going to smell you and know you're in there hunting them. That makes it extremely difficult, because now you're having to hunt on some of these off winds that maybe don't align very well with these weather fronts. So this farm is east access. There's a big road out here, and I've got, I can access from the center of the property, from the east, from the northeast, and the southeast. If you, and that's still not perfect. If you had a perfect scenario, you could access from every corner of your farm. I don't have that luxury. But this is, if you're forced into a box of what side to pick to choose, I would choose east access every time, or south, because then you're getting, your north. But those are the two that I would choose if you can choose that. So right off the bat, say you've got a farm that you have to access from the west and it's at one point, what you're going to find, and what I find a lot, is the deer know this. They know where you're coming from when you're hunting that farm, and you'll typically find beds overlooking the main entry point of your farm, and that's where these mature bucks are laying, and they're just watching you walk into the farm. That's why you'll get a bunch of pictures of them consistently. You walk into your farm, you never see them. So those farms are really difficult to hunt, and it takes some pretty extreme manipulation to be able to hunt those farms. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not saying I wouldn't buy one that has a western access. It can be done. It helps if you would have a lot of road frontage in that scenario, where you could access from, say, the northwest or the southwest. But, if you can choose, east is going to be best. But now let's get back into actually accessing a stand location on what does good access look like. I see a lot of people just, say you even are lucky and you have an east access, they'll just walk down the easiest path into the woods to get to their stand locations. And oftentimes their stands are in the back of the property, because that's where they feel like is the best chance that they're going to kill one. So they're walking through their property, get to the back of it and set up, and wonder why they don't see any deer. I feel like, people are getting wiser and wiser to this, but there's still a lot of people that don't understand, just walking through the woods, just because you don't see anything that you're bumping doesn't mean you're not bumping deer. And bigger than that is, whenever you walk on your property, you're leaving a scent trail that will last, potentially days. And these deer know that. They know you've been in there. Even if you don't see a deer, don't bump a deer, they can smell at night that you're on that property. So knowing that, suddenly it narrows down the areas you can hunt dramatically. Where can you walk on your property that you can hunt and see deer without the deer, one, seeing you enter, two, smelling you enter, and three, smelling your ground scent. Now the ground scent thing, there's only so much you can do there, but you have to keep that in mind and really minimize that portion of it. So the reason this farm sets up so well, and I've got these drone shots to kind of show you, is I've got this north and south access, and all my fields are to the north side, and I've got that tree line, and I am able to access on the back side of the tree line, which is the neighbors, but I got permission to access on that. And simply making that differentiation between which side of the fence I'm crossing or going into is big. Being able to be on the back side, getting into my stand, say there's a deer in the field, you're not gonna be able to see me. Getting out, it's gonna be tough, but you have better chances of making it out. And frankly, I would only hunt that a couple times a year on that scenario. That's something where if I have a deer pattern out on that food source, then I'll go in and hunt that spot. But really, I don't like hunting the actual food source in most cases. Where I'm at right now is, and I've talked about this in some of my other videos, but it's a point adjacent to this food source. So I can see across the power line here, maybe 350 yards is the food source. And there's this isolated point out here that will actually act as though you're hunting deep into the property because it's staged so far off the food and it's thick. It's a nice isolated bedding point. But really, right here is a field, and right there's the road. You can see a little bit of the road right there. And so I'm able to slip in off of here. There's never deer here. I can slip in and hop 20 yards inside the woods off of the, and be in a spot that is absolutely killer. Now, I'm not just going to just trounce through the woods here either. I'm going to go in. I've got my chainsaw right here behind me, and that's what I'm doing today, is I'm going to clean up the access point to that particular stand setup to where I can cleanly walk in and out without brushing a bunch of, branches and limbs and trees and making a bunch of noise. And oftentimes I'll even go in afterwards with a leaf blower and try and blow the leaf litter out just so it's not as loud walking in. So once you kind of have a criteria of the deer can't see me, smell me, or smell my ground scent, like I said, it really limits the amount of stand locations you can have on your property. So on this 55 acres, I've got 4 stand locations, two of which I feel like I can consistently hunt and not really mess up. The other 2, the one is a really, I might hunt it 1 or 2 times a year. And, it's surgically going in, trying to get it done. And then the other one is out on that food source. I might hunt a couple times a year, especially towards the late season is when I'll begin to hunt that more so. And then, I have this location here. I could hunt this spot on a northwest day in, day out, never bust anything, never mess anything up, and still have a good chance at a mature buck. The other location is in a bit of a staging area, and these are the areas I like to hunt. And that's another term that kind of gets thrown around, but basically a staging area to me is a place in between bedding, known bedding, and destination food. So a lot of properties don't have that definition. They don't have defined bedding. They don't have bedding cuts put in. They don't have that destination food source. So it can be very tough to know, well, is just my whole property a staging area? Potentially. And that's not great. If you got 40-acre staging area, you're gonna have a hard time hunting that. But for me, it's a very defined point due to topography and the way everything comes together. And it's basically, I have a real small kill plot. It's like not even a quarter acre, maybe 0.2 acres. Clover kill plot with a enclosed blind that I have really good access to get into that. And so this is how I access some of the more interior parts of my farm. And that is my number one thing that I look for on a property are ditches. Love ditches. So, ditches can vary to quite different degrees, but I'm very fortunate on this. I have a very steep ravine. It kind of comes down, and then in the actual ditch it drops down in to where if I'm standing in that ditch, it's above my head till it really comes out. And so I can actually slip down into that ditch. I clean it up every year. That's my chore for today. I'm going to go in and clean that ditch up again. And I make so I can walk all the way down to that ditch. I can hit the back of the property, 50 yards off of that ditch, hop up in my tree, and be in the best spot on the entire farm. And, you know, end of October into 1st of November, you'll see pretty well every buck in this entire area on that stand. But, you know, utilizing those ditches, you are staying out of, you know, the wind down there isn't really an issue, just because it's just not really blowing much because you're so far down in those ditches. Your ground scent can be a potential issue because I'm covering so much ground and there are crossings across this ditch. So yes, there is that chance that they're going to pick you up, and hunting it over and over and over again will cause problems. But I'm more looking at that location on the back of the property as surgically getting in once or twice per year, trying to get it done. And so as I'm walking that, you know, I'm down at the bottom and the deer can't see me, they can't hear me, and they can't smell me. And I can get up in my stand and have a great hunt. And that's also how I access my staging area. It's super thick down along that drainage. I just, you know, have carved a path, and it's a lot of work. I mean, I've taken people hunting with me and they just can't believe the amount of work I put into getting the access. It sucks. I mean, you can just walk right out to my blind through the field and be there in 5 minutes. But I take 30 minutes to go twice the distance to where deer can't see me, smell me, or hear me coming. And so putting in that extra effort on your access is huge. And so, you know, there's different elements to all of this as well. I mean, you know, in my blind setup there, I have tall grass growing in front of my blind to cover my access into the blind. There's, you know, screening lines. Say I wouldn't have that, you know, tree line out there, I can plant again tall grasses or an annual screen there to where I can access behind that. There's so many things you can do to improve your access. It's just understanding what that actually means. You just can't have the deer see you, smell you, or hear you. And if you can get all those three done and hunt that spot a couple times a year, you've got good access. Now, any spot, if you hunt it over and over and over again, eventually will get burned out. They'll catch on to you, they'll figure it out. But, you know, again, those are the three main things you need to look at, as well as big picture on your property. What are your predominant wind directions? What is going to be the, you know, because with most west winds, any kind of west wind, I can hunt this property. I've got a stand that I can hunt. And so that's huge having that. Whereas, you know, I know properties that, you know, need one exact perfect wind to be able to hunt it. And that makes it tough to kill your target deer. So I hope you took something from this video. You understand it better. Hopefully you can begin to implement some things on your properties. Like I said, right now I'm cleaning up some of these access points and paths so that this fall, you know, that work is done. I can slip in there and be out of there. I don't want to be doing this in September when it's a little bit cooler. It's ideal. It'd feel great. But, you know, at that point, I want to completely let my property sit. So hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll see you in the next one.